Imagine waking up in a hospital room. You don't know how you got there. You don't know what day it is. You don't even know your own name. Now, imagine finding out years later that your own government did this to you on purpose, secretly, and then burned the evidence. This is not fiction. This is not a conspiracy theory. This happened in America, and the people responsible never spent a single day in prison. This is the story of MK Ultra, the most disturbing government program in U.S. history, and most Americans have no idea it even existed. To understand MK Ultra, you have to go back to the early 1950s. The world had just survived World War II, but now a new war was beginning, the Cold War. America and the Soviet Union were locked in a battle, not just for territory, but for the future of human civilization itself. And the CIA was terrified. Why? Because they had heard rumors that the Soviets had developed a way to control the human mind. Prisoners of war were confessing to crimes they didn't commit. American soldiers captured in Korea were broadcasting communist propaganda, willingly, or so it seemed. The CIA's top officials became obsessed with one question. What if the Soviets could brainwash people? What if they could turn any American soldier, any politician, any CIA agent into a puppet? And then they asked an even darker question. What if we could do it first? That question, asked behind closed doors in 1953, unleashed something monstrous on the American people. On April 13th, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles signed off on a program so secret that almost nobody in the U.S. government knew it existed. It was given a code name, MK Ultra. The stated goal was simple: develop techniques to control the human mind, break down a person's identity completely, then rebuild them as something the CIA could use. To lead this program, Dulles chose a man named Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist, a brilliant, deeply strange man who walked with a limp, stuttered when he spoke, and had an almost religious obsession with drugs and their effects on the human brain. Gottlieb would become one of the most dangerous scientists in American history, a man who spent 20 years drugging, torturing, and psychologically destroying hundreds of innocent people, all in the name of national security. MK Ultra wasn't just one experiment. It was an umbrella program with 149 separate sub-projects conducted across 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, mental health facilities. Some of the most prestigious names in America were involved: Georgetown University Hospital, Stanford Research Institute, dozens of others. And almost none of the people being experimented on had any idea what was happening to them. So what exactly did they do? Brace yourself, because this is where it gets deeply disturbing. The LSD experiments. LSD was a newly discovered drug in the 1950s. Scientists barely understood it, but the CIA was fascinated. Could it be used to make someone tell the truth, to make them forget who they were, to make them do things they would never do voluntarily? They had to find out. So they started testing it, first on volunteers, then on prisoners, then on mental patients, then on people who had absolutely no idea they were being drugged. Ordinary Americans, people who went to hospitals seeking treatment, people who checked in to clinics for depression or anxiety, people who trusted doctors with their lives. They were slipped LSD in their food, their drinks, their medication, without a single word of warning. And the results were horrifying. Subjects experienced complete psychological breakdowns, hallucinations that lasted days, paranoia so severe that people physically attacked staff, smashed their heads against walls, and begged to die. Some never recovered. Some were permanently broken. Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA set up a network of safe houses in San Francisco and New York City. They hired people to lure men off the streets, ordinary men who had no idea what they were walking into. These men were brought into apartments and secretly dosed with LSD. CIA agents watched everything through one-way mirrors, taking notes, recording reactions, treating human beings like lab rats. The operation ran for years. Nobody asked for permission. Nobody said a word. The psychic driving experiments. A Canadian psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron, funded secretly by the CIA, developed something he called psychic driving. His theory was that you could wipe a person's mind completely clean, like erasing a hard drive, and then reprogram them from scratch. To do this, he subjected patients, people who had come to him voluntarily for mental health treatment, to weeks of drug-induced sleep. Some patients were kept unconscious for up to 86 days. While they slept, Cameron played recorded messages on loop, sometimes thousands of times, directly into their ears. When they woke up, many of these patients had lost years, sometimes decades, of their memories. They forgot their children's names. They forgot how to speak. They forgot who they were. Cameron destroyed lives, and the CIA paid every single bill. The children. Perhaps the darkest secret of MKUltra is what was done to children. Mentally disabled boys at a state school were used as test subjects. Orphans, children who had nobody to protect them, experimented on without consent, without knowledge, without mercy. This is the part that the government tried hardest to hide. And in many cases, of all the dark stories that came out of MKUltra, none is more chilling than the story of Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a CIA scientist, a brilliant biochemist who worked on the program from the inside. He knew everything: the experiments, the safe houses, the torture, all of it. And somewhere along the way, Frank Olson began to crack. In November 1953, Olson attended a CIA retreat at a remote cabin in Maryland. During dinner, Sidney Gottlieb secretly spiked the punch with LSD, not as an experiment, just, apparently, to see what would happen. Frank Olson had no idea. The days that followed were nightmarish. Olson became paranoid, erratic, deeply distressed. He told colleagues he wanted out of the program. He started talking to people he shouldn't have been talking to. 9 days after being drugged, Frank Olson fell through the window of his 10th floor hotel room at the Statler Hotel in New York City. He was dead before he hit the ground. The CIA ruled it a suicide. Case closed. But here's what they didn't tell his family. Here's what they hid for decades. In 1994, more than 40 years after his death, Frank Olson's family had his body exhumed and re-examined. A forensic pathologist found something that changed everything. There was a massive hematoma on the left side of Frank Olson's skull, an injury consistent with being struck behind before he went through the window. Frank Olson wasn't suicidal. Frank Olson was silenced. His son Eric has spent 70 years fighting for the truth. To this day, no one has been charged with his father's murder. By the early 1970s, MKUltra had officially ended. The experiments were deemed too risky, too unpredictable, and ultimately not effective enough to justify their cost. But ending the program wasn't enough. There was too much evidence, too many documents, too many names. If any of this ever became public, it would be the biggest scandal in American history. So in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered something extraordinary. He ordered the complete destruction of all MKUltra files, every record, every report, every experiment log. Shredded, burned, gone. It was a massive, deliberate cover-up, and it almost worked. Almost. Because someone made a mistake. A small collection of MKUltra documents had been misfiled, accidentally stored in a finance records building instead of the main CIA archive. When investigators came looking in 1977, most files were gone, but these 20,000 documents survived, and they were enough to blow the whole thing open. In 1977, the Senate held hearings on MKUltra. CIA Director Stansfield Turner was forced to testify. Sidney Gottlieb himself, the man who had run the program for decades, was brought before Congress. He admitted everything: the drugs, the unwitting subjects, the torture, the deaths. He expressed what he called remorse. He was never charged with a single crime. He retired. He moved to a farm in Virginia. He raised goats. He died in 1999 at the age of 80, having never spent a single day in jail for what he had done. While Sidney Gottlieb raised his goats in Virginia, what happened to the people whose lives he destroyed? Many of them never even knew they had been experimented on. They spent years, sometimes the rest of their lives, dealing with psychological damage they couldn't explain. Depression, memory loss, paranoia, the inability to form relationships, trauma with no name, no cause, no explanation. Some tried to sue the US government. A few actually won, receiving small settlements that in no way compensated for what was taken from them. The Canadian victims of Dr. Ian Cameron's experiments, people who simply gone to a psychiatrist for help, eventually received a settlement from the Canadian government, but the CIA denied any wrongdoing. James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston crime boss, was one of the prisoners secretly dosed with LSD at a federal penitentiary. He wrote about the experience in letters from prison, describing hallucinations so terrifying that grown men wept and screamed. He said the experience changed something in him permanently. He was later convicted of 11 murders. Nobody knows how many people were affected, because the files were burned, because the CIA made sure of that. Estimates range from hundreds to thousands. Most will never know what was done to them.
You might be thinking, okay, this happened 70 years ago. It's ancient history. It can't happen again. But here's what's really unsettling about MKUltra. It wasn't a rogue operation run by a few bad actors. It was approved at the highest levels of the US government. It was funded by taxpayer money. It was carried out inside respected hospitals and universities. It ran for over 20 years. And the people responsible faced zero consequences. That's the thing about MKUltra that should keep you up at night. Not just what happened, but what it revealed about how power actually works when there is no oversight, when there is no accountability. When a government agency convinces itself that the ends justify the means, this is what happens. This is what human beings are capable of doing to each other. The Church Committee, the Senate investigation that exposed MKUltra, led to major reforms in intelligence oversight. New laws were passed, new safeguards were put in place, and that's important, that matters. But the documents destroyed in 1973 were never recovered. The full scope of what happened, the real number of victims, the complete list of experiments, the complete truth died in a shredding machine in CIA headquarters. We will never know everything. And that should bother all of us. Frank Olson fell from a 10th floor window in 1953. His son, Eric, is now in his 70s. He has never stopped asking who killed his father. He will probably never get an answer. The men who ran MKUltra are gone. Most of them died in comfort, in retirement, in peace. None of them in prison. The files are ash. But we know enough. We know what was done. We know who gave the orders, and we know that for over 2 decades, the most powerful intelligence agency in the world looked at its own citizens not as people, but as test subjects, as tools, as problems to be solved. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And the only way to stop it from rhyming is to know it happened in the first place. If this video made you think, share it with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe, because next week we're going even deeper into the stories that history books refuse to tell. The next one is going to be even darker.